Mhm. Mhm. everybody. Welcome to the Earthwork Bee Yard on this chilly June morning. We have a guest here today, Seth, hiding behind, trying to remain anonymous, but we have a pretty good idea who he is. So, yeah, darn near froze last night. Fret of all these carefully tended plants that were put out, but a look around suggests that they made it all right. I hope that everybody fared well and did not lose their little green babies last night.
We had them tucked in with frost tarp, nice and tight here.
We had a little crisis yesterday. A cow had her first calf, and the calf went under the fence, and we think maybe, and when it's in the tall weeds, and that she kept calling for it to come out and nurse, and it wouldn't come, and she bellowed all day long, and we started to worry that the calf had gotten poked by the electric fence and wouldn't come out. But this morning there she was with the calf out in the field, so we're quite grateful for that. It was a great relief. It's hard to hear a frustrated mother crying for its baby. And so
You want me to come back in a little bit?
Pardon me?
You want me to come back
Yeah,
in a little bit?
we're going to end this with All God's Critters and the bee song.
All right.
Yeah, so, yeah,
Okay,
so
cool.
we'll come back or stick around if you want, so whatever.
I'll just be up right off camera, Bob.
Yeah, all right. Thanks for sitting in there, Seth.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, Dad.
Same. How are you today, Chelsea?
Doing good.
We had an early start today.
I had a very early start. I was happy to see that the frost tarp worked. And the plants are all looking happy this morning.
Yeah, I wonder if they realized how closely their lives were threatened.
I wonder too.
So I read a little bit last week, and for me, this author expresses things so beautifully that I can't help but read some more of his writing, and I might be rereading a couple of paragraphs because I can't remember where I dropped off. But anyway, the book is The Joys of Beekeeping by Richard Taylor. He was a philosophy teacher in some university out east, and then a beekeeper besides that, and I think a deep thinker and a very earthy person. So he talks about how he found joy and happiness keeping bees. So I'm going to pick this up here again and read a little. So one's happiness is, of course, something personal, something more his own than any possession. We do not find it in the same way. Some never find it at all. Possibly most never do, even when the means are at hand. But I have found my bees and all the countless things I associate with them a constant and unfailing source of it. I know that not all persons are of this temperament. Some look upon this obsession of mine with incomprehension, some with amusement or curiosity, while I in turn pitied them for they lack the capacity for these particular joys so fulfilling to me. I can only thank God that in creating this bounteous earth, he included these tiny creatures whose organization still defies the sublimest intellects, and whose labors yield the golden honey that has been prized by human beings since before recorded history. Without bees, my own existence would be a shadowy thing, like a world without flowers, or without stars, or without the songs of birds. The world of men is always uncertain, seldom inspiring, often a source of discouragement and dismay. But the keeper of bees, like anyone who has welded his life to the cycles and patterns of nature, can always return to his tiny creatures and his craft. The bees have a perpetual store of surprises in readiness for their owner, but they also have a constancy beneath it all. No doubt there are many fountainheads of happiness, but none equals those nature has provided from the beginning of time. Certainly human artifices, even those we have been taught to consider great, are nothing in comparison. They are not needed, in fact, are dismissed as encumbrances by those who have tasted the changeless serenity that nature so freely offers. Even as a boy, driven by the passions and impulses that make youth so tumultuous and blind and filled with folly, I noticed this serenity in beekeepers. From time to time I would see one sitting out in his battered chair, basking in the peace and sweetness of the setting, surrounded by his hives of bees, his orchard, his small parcel of land, his quiet and ordered world. Overhead soared the purple martins belonging to the large apartment birdhouse he had erected for them on his barn roof, while around him in spring the cherries bloomed and the bees hummed just as they had for a million springs gone by, and as they will for millions to come. There was another beekeeper who was old and had lost some of his strength. I occasionally helped him in his bee yards. One of these yards was set in a beautiful grove of locust trees on the side of a hill outside of town, and we sometimes went there together in his ancient car, an open Model T Ford, which in those days could be purchased in running condition for $10. I was surprised then how happy I was riding along in the open air with this old man, an object of curiosity to my friends, giving him a hand and in turn learning about bees. I had not expected this reward of inner happiness, but having found it, I never forgot it. In the meantime, I had my own hive of bees purchased for $4.50. Soon I had two. The second was a crude product of one of my early attempts in carpentry. I sold the comb honey to my neighbors for 15 cents each, a good price in those days, and I have never forgotten the beauty and goodness of that honey made from the sweet clover that then bloomed everywhere. When my studies, followed by military service, forced me to abandon for a time the small beginning I had made in apiculture, I nevertheless preserved my memories of it. In whatever part of the world I found myself, my thoughts went back to bees, to the fruit trees in full bloom and the beehives beneath them, to the old man who taught me and to his apiary set out in the grove of black locusts, to the soft maple in the spring ringing to the hum of bees, and all the numberless associations of those golden hours. I have often thought since then that anyone who does not taste happiness in his youth is in danger of never finding it. Those who find it, on the other hand, are likely to return to those sources of it sooner or later, as I certainly did. How blessed I am to have grown up in a village where bees were kept, to have known beekeepers who taught me about them, and to have had a loving family to encourage my interest in them. I believe that this has been the constant source of the most lasting joys of my lifetime, and my existence would have been indescribably poorer without it.
So nice.
Isn't it nice writing? It's just so rolls out so sincerely.
It does. I
High intellect and sincerity.
love the imagery of the black locusts. They're
Yeah.
one of my favorite trees on the permaculture landscape.
And they are in bloom right now. There are none on this farm. I really wish they were, and they produce a wonderful honey at a time when there's not that many plants in bloom. But anyway, so here we are. The bees are pretty quiet. It was very chilly last night. Well, they're hardly flying at all. They're busy inside trying to keep their developing babies warm because they have to maintain 95 degrees inside those boxes or around the baby bees, not the whole box, but the area where the baby bees are being raised, which is quite a job. But now they're getting to be quite a few bees in these boxes due to the progression of the spring buildup, so they can do it. They I think you may recall we spoke that a good overwintered colony of bees might have 10,000 bees in it in early April, and these queens inside there that are the mothers of all these developing baby bees are laying eggs at the rate of about 2,000 per day. Some estimates even put it as high as 5 or 6,000 a day, but most people who've studied it think it's around the range of 2,000, which is her own weight in eggs a day. She being fed on royal jelly, we could have probably all used some of that in our smoothies every day. So they are attempting to build their numbers to the level of as high as they can, but many of them will reach 50,000 individuals by early July when the main flow of honey comes in. So beekeepers talk about the honey flow. Well, anytime flowering plants are open, there is a flow of honey, but for much of the year, all of the honey that the bees gather is needed to sustain, to raise their babies and to feed themselves. So the honey flow is a term that is used to describe the time when their ability to gather nectar exceeds their need for it. So they not only can raise their young and sustain themselves, but they can store surplus honey. Consequently, supers, the boxes that are put on top that catch the honey that comes in during these midsummer flowering times for plants, is called the superfluous honey, and it's stored in the super. So there's just a little bit of language and roots in here. So that all being said, that we are at the time of the year right now where the bees are still in the buildup period, most of them. Some colonies could be at full strength if they hadn't been altered by the beekeepers' management efforts, but we are moving now into the period of time when, well, right now the autumn olive trees have been in bloom. They were much washed away by the heavy rains that we had, but some of them are still in bloom. And it has become a maligned plant. I love it because it produces honey, and it also produces very nutritious little fruits for making jams and wine, and very high in lycopene. So also I noticed that the black raspberries are opening up now, and also the clovers are. So now we're starting to move towards the main honey plants. Following them will be the sumac, and the bees will often start gathering surplus honey when the sumac comes in about the third week of June. Now these dates of bloom, they fluctuate from year to year depending on the weather, but in general they come out around the same time within a week. Then one of the greatest honey plants in this area is the basswood tree. And the basswood produces tremendous quantities of nectar at times. Once I had a hive on a scale during a basswood flow. You could put one of these hives on a platform scale and every day check your gain, and then you can do the math and maybe figure out you're getting wealth here every day, you know. But anyway, one day, that day after, for 3 days they gained 10 pounds, and then one day they gained 14 pounds.
Wow.
Which is amazing because a lot of what they bring in is water and they evaporate it. Yeah, just a quick thing on how they do this. Flower nectar is dilute. It's a sweet, and it varies in how much sugar is in it, but the bees have to concentrate it tremendously, and they set up little air patterns inside their hive and move the air all along their combs so that the excess moisture is evaporated until they bring it down to about 18% moisture, which is very difficult. That is a very concentrated sweet. So after the basswood, then it's the clovers that vary. If you happen to live in an area where there's farms, sometimes because of the weather, the alfalfa will come into bloom on the second cutting, and the farmers are waiting to get more growth out of it because of hot, dry weather. They can gather large surpluses from alfalfa too. So, and then after that, the fall. Oh, then there's this other noxious weed that everyone kind of hates, the star thistle, which also produces a very delicious honey. And though it has declined in productivity in recent years. So then come the fall plants, the asters and goldenrods, which in this area they don't seem too dependable for me. But after that, that's it for the bees for the year in terms of flowering plants. I forgot to mention milkweed, which is a really important. There's a lot of honey plants. There could be 50 wild plants that I haven't mentioned, not major producers of honey, but they are here. So having wild land around is really valuable for the bees. And incidentally, anything that's good for honeybees is good for native pollinators, bumblebees, and butterflies, anything requiring nectar.
Hummingbirds.
And hummingbirds, yeah.
Even bats. I was learning about bats being pollinators of some of the plants that have a more meaty taste in black flies, like dandelion. Our bats go for white flowers that are night blooming, and then the black flies actually pollinate the dandelions because they have a meaty taste.
So I forgot the other weed, dandelion, is a really important spring buildup flower too. And yellow rocket, things that people don't like. One of the greatest honey plants of all times is Melilodus alba, the white sweet clover. And now that was promoted all over as a tremendous agricultural plant, and now it's discouraged. But it used to produce tremendous sources of delicious honey. There's hardly any of it around. You see it on the roadside, that white clover that grows out of the gravel. So, how's our time? Are we about 10:30 or so here?
About 10:25, so
Yeah.
we got 30 minutes.
So, I thought maybe we ought to talk about bee equipment a little bit. First of all, the tools of the beekeeper. Probably the 2 or 3 most important tools are the smoker, the hive tool, which is just a tiny prying device, which is similar to, carpenter pry bar, but it's a small scale, has real sharp edges, has a 90-degree turn in it, has a little place to pull a nail if you need to, and because bees stick everything together inside the hive with glue that is called propolis, which we'll talk about more later. But you got to have a tool or you can't work bees. If you're desperate, you can use a screwdriver, but the hive tool is a much more convenient device. So,
Do you mind holding that smoker up so we can see its full
it's full.
glory?
Let it make a full account of itself.
Yeah. And it has that nice little cage where you can store your hive tool on there.
Yeah.
Keep it all handy.
But the main purpose for that is to keep you from burning yourself because it gets hot.
Oh,
And
yeah.
also, you put your hive tool in there, it gets hot and you burn yourself.
Oh, jeez.
If you don't have gloves on,
So maybe don't put your hive tool in there when
yeah,
you're
still
burning.
You will because it's so convenient, but you just have to keep relearning the lesson. It has a little hook on it. You could hook it on the side of a hive, or if your friend has a big ear that's working with it, you can hang it on it.
What kind of, what's the best medium for burning in there?
Well, then I'll talk about the veil, and then I'm going to go back to the smoker, okay?
Okay.
So typically beekeepers wear a cage on their head, and this is one style of them, and it pulls down around your neck and mostly prevents bees from getting up inside. It's kind of disconcerting to work bees with a bee flying around inside there, especially because you're afraid they're going to get in your hair, and if they do, they almost always will sting if they get caught in your hair. But there are many styles of these, and then there are also, you can buy suits with a veil attached to them that are virtually bee-proof, that have tight legs on them, so if you wanted to keep bees, you can become pretty well free of getting stung. They also have tunics that you pull over that are pretty nice, that drop around your waist. So there's a lot of options with bee veils. And I hate putting one on. I hate it. It disturbs my peripheral vision, and it just feels, well, I feel like I'm caged. So, but it's wise to use one because, I mean, you could be really busy working and have an errant bee that had just about got killed by a kingbird or a phoebe and comes back in a bad mood and stings your eyelid, and it's hard to maintain your concentration then.
Bob, I remember the first time I worked in the bee yard with you, you explained to me why traditionally you see beekeepers wearing white.
Oh,
Do you want to share a little bit about that?
yeah. It seemed like white was kind of a neutral color, and it seems to be accepted by beekeepers for a lot of years that white is the preferred color, the most innocent appearing color that beekeeper can don. The worst color being black, and the worst thing would be to have a black wool shirt on, which they've decided emulates a bear, the hair of a bear. And so bees are behaviorally programmed to react badly to a hairy black object moving around in their bee yard around their hive. So that, yeah, good point. Typically beekeepers wear gloves. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. It's nice to not have gloves on, but also it's sometimes hard handling the combs inside the hive to not disturb a pinch a bee with your finger and get stung on your hand. I think to keep bees for a very long time, you start to get stings as just a matter of fact event that happens. But you also can pretty much avoid um, getting stung, I think, by wearing the right clothes. So, yeah. So let's back up a little bit and readdress this tool called the smoker, which is basically, it's a smudge pot. It's a tube in which you make a fire and a set of bellows that allows you to enhance the burning, or also to create a puff of smoke that you use to distract the bees from the fact that you're entering and taking the walls out of their home. And so the smoker is not a tool of suppression, but a tool of distraction. It's like, think of as a parent, to your child needing their disagreement with you head on with force or distraction, while right after you pick up your clothes on the floor, that's when we get to go out and play frisbee, instead. So the bees instinctively or intelligently fear fire, because that's one of the things they've had to deal with over all the years of their evolution. So smoke entering the hive is a signal that a great tragedy, they are under the threat of a huge tragedy. And so they start filling up their honey stomachs with honey, as if they're going to have to leave the hive and leave everything behind, their brood and everything, and go to a new location. So, but this can be done with gentility, and it's a considerable skill to use a smoker with care, and to listen to the bees as to when they start to realize you know, that they're open and exposed and they're getting tired of it, and then a little light puff of smoke will get them back to the old message that they need to be fear of fire. So um, one of the big techniques in beekeeping is learning to interpret the sound of their buzz. You know, whether they're getting angry or whether they're worried. You can usually tell a hive that's lost its queen by the sound it makes. It has an alarming sound to its buzz, and that will often alert you to go deeper in to see if in fact the hive is queenless. Because a queenless hive has no future, and they know it. If they don't get a queen, they perish. Um, so, and that's another story about queens. But so back to the smoker. So typically you get some scraps of paper and light them and drop them into the bottom until you have a nice little fire going in there, and then you there are different fuels that you can use. My favorite one is pine needles off the ground, not off the tree, because for some reason the ones, if you gather them from the tree and dry them, the smoke from that is obnoxious and makes me feel sick. But if you rake them up off the grounds and let them dry, then they're good. Old gunny sacks work, sumac heads, flower heads, sumac work well.
Those work good for lemonade too. Those work good for Michigan lemonade too.
Oh yeah. So light the smoker. If you're doing it, be sure you take the time to get a really nice little fire going in the bottom, and then slowly add pine needles. And once you got a nice fire, then you can pack it down, and you might be good for an hour or more then of continuous use. The very worst thing is to light your smoker and not have it well lit and enter a hive, and right in the middle of it your smoker goes out, and you have no way to moderate the response to the bees. So if you ever light your smoke, take time to sharpen the saw and light the smoker. So yeah, so how's our time now? 10:34.
20 minutes.
Okay. So I'd like to talk about the equipment. Where's that frame, Susie, and that wax? So bees would not normally occupy these boxes, square boxes, rectangular boxes, and they lived in hollow trees and in caves or any place they could find where they were protected from other creatures, especially humans. There's cave paintings in France showing thank you, beekeepers at that time. They didn't really keep bees, but they were honey gatherers climbing up into these caves and getting combs of honey. And they used smoke at that time too. They didn't have smokers, but they had a smudge or something like that. So been around a long time, honey, people using honey. But it was in the mid 1800s that, so then people learned to make containers for bees. They used to use hollow logs, we'd call them log gums. But the image that you see of the straw skep that looks like a half circle of woven straw was really in common use in Europe and all in Asia. But the bad thing about it, the bees did well inside of them, but at the end of the season, in order to get the honey, the bees had to be killed. So they used to burn sulfur to kill them. They didn't kill all their bees, but they killed some of them, and then they got the honey from them. And so it was kind of sad that honey had to be gathered that way. The other thing is bees make their combs and all different ways webbed together, and so they're, they have their own sense of order, and it's unpredictable. So in the 1800s, some of these brighter naturalists that were studying bees decided to try something. They embossed a piece of cast iron with the hexagon, which is what the honeybee cell is based on, the six-sided, which is the strongest um, geometrical figure that there is, and also is the most, utilizes the least amount of material to make. So they somehow, and it must have been a lot of work, but they machined these cells into a piece of iron, and then fresh sheets of wax, and embossed this pattern into these sheets of wax, and now they're called foundation. Which, because if you put these in a frame and put it in with the bees, sometimes I don't know what they think, but they start building their comb right on this foundation, and then it and you can put this kind of from the frame, but in a frame like this, all of these hives have 9 or 10 of these wooden frames inside, and with a sheet of this foundation in place, the bees make their comb in there, and you actually therefore can start manipulate this comb. You can move it, take it out, look at it, put it back in, move it to another hive, and if it's filled with honey and capped off, you can untap the comb and spin out the honey with a centrifuge, and renew and give the comb back to the bees next year. And some frames in use, or combs in use, have been in use for 40 or 50 years. It saves a lot of work on the part of the bees to be able to not have to make all that wax. The bees make wax by consuming nectar or sugar water, and they secrete scales on their abdominal segment, and then they take these little scales and they chew them, and then they sculpt their cells. Their cells are amazingly strong because they have to carry a lot of weight. One of these combs full of honey weighs about 8 pounds, 6 pounds or more. That's a lot of weight to be carried by wax structure. So it's a feat of engineering. But anyway, the guys are smart enough to do this, change the whole outlook on beekeeping. Now you could move bees, take a weak colony and put some brood from a strong one into it, extract honey. You could overwinter bees. You could get honey without killing the bees, and so it's considered the foundation of modern apiculture, and it really began in the mid-1800s. At that time, some very bright people were keeping bees. A lot of people, doctors and lawyers, quit their professions and became beekeepers, but there were a lot more naturalist type at that time. I don't think people were so enthused with their own domination model that at that time people really were trying hard to work with nature, and they studied things a lot, and they were thrilled with what the bees could do. So that's a little bit on the comb. So the hive bodies hold, like I mentioned, 9 or 10 combs, and the beauty of them is you can stack them. You can put one on top of the other, and you can go up high enough that you have to get a ladder to get up there. And we have had years where the bees make so much honey that we had to get a ladder to get the boxes off. So the bottom boxes are called hive bodies, and they're 9 5/8 inches deep. And the one on top of it, if you see, we call them shallows, or the supers are typically 6 5/8, mainly so that they're not so heavy. They're terribly heavy. One of those deep hive bodies full of honey weighs about 80 pounds. You might think, oh, I can lift 80 pounds. And maybe you can for half a day, but the second half of the day your back would get tired of twisting all around. And so typically the honey supers are of a smaller depth than the hive bodies. And mostly a beekeeper should have probably 3 or 4 or more supers for each hive, depending on the intensity of the honey flows that come in this area. So the whole thing sits on what we call the bottom board, basically a solid base for everything to sit on, and also which creates a chamber underneath for the bees to fly in and then move upward into the boxes. Bees left to themselves would never be on the ground like this. They would much prefer to be up off the ground in a hollow in a tree. But it's hard for beekeepers to operate in trees, so this is the compromise. Bears will really bother bees sometimes, and skunks come around and try to get bees. Have such thick fur they can actually get quite a few bees sometimes. So this bottom board is the foundation again for what everything sits on. And then in the midsummer when it's warm and there's a lot of bees, this is left wide open, and this little stick is called the entrance cleat. So for times when the bee colony is weak, or in the fall, just before winter, this little notch is put in like so, or like this, and that closes up. A proper one would fit tightly in here. That keeps mice from getting in. It helps to protect the bees from mice, and restricts the air movement. So then on top of the boxes, there's like a ceiling in there we call it the inner cover. Has a little hand hold in it, a place for a bee escape, which is another piece of equipment, a notch in the front to allow the bees to fly, or it can be turned this way to close the notch. And then on top of that is one of these covers that you can see on top, a little roof over it. And it's surprisingly durable little arrangement. It's very rare that the wind would blow hard enough to blow a cover off. But typically we keep a brick on there, not only to help keep the covers on, but there's a code to the placement of the bricks. Telling the beekeeper what his last insight into the last time he inspected what the bees were looking at. Like, did they need some more supers sometime soon? Are they queenless? Are they weak or strong? Or is it just something unknown that requires another inspection? So I am wondering how our time is.
45.
45. Wow.
Got 10 minutes left.
Okay. Well, let's in just a few minutes, let's get to our singing in just a second or two. I got just one more piece of equipment to mention here, I think. This is a useful piece of equipment for keeping bees. It's called a queen excluder. It has wires that are very precisely welded together, about 1/5 of an inch space between, and worker bees can pass between these bars, but a queen with her swollen abdomen cannot. So this is used to confine the queen to a certain area in the hive, and it has certain advantages and also disadvantages. If you ever forgot to take one out over winter, your colony of bees would perish, because the wire would draw the heat right out of the cluster, and they would die. It can be used to keep the queen from going up into the honey supers and laying eggs up there, but it also Bees don't like to work through them, so sometimes they won't go work in the supers with them in place. So it's also good if you want to be sure you have your queen in one of the boxes by putting it in between the brood boxes and then coming back and seeing which box she has laid eggs in. And then you know that she's in that box, allowing you to manipulate the other box, move some brood combs around to strengthen another hive or something of that nature. So, all right, I think it's time for a little music here. We've got a couple songs we'd like to sing for you. One of them was a product of a relationship I had with a fourth grade class for like 3 years or more. Surrounding bees, we entered a contest to write a song about honeybees for, I don't know who put it on, but it was a national contest. So we wrote a song and it was to the tune of Yankee Doodle. And it kind of tells quite a bit about the life cycle of the bees. So you might want to come over here, Seth, to look at these lyrics, because I need them too.
Would you like me to join you for that one?
Uh-huh.
Do you still want me to join you for that one, Bob?
Next time maybe.
Okay.
Where's that sheet?
Thanks for tuning in, folks. A lot of old friends on the feed today, but yeah.
Where is that? I just had it. Oh, maybe it's in here. Yep, it is. All right. Key of G. You sing?
I'll let you sing it.
All right. G chord. The cycle of the buzzing bees. This was written with a fourth grader, so.
Donna Mottman's fourth grade class,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. The air's cold and nights are long, honeybees are quiet, clustered tight inside their hive, with honey as their diet. Lady Queen must bide her time, outside cold winds are blowing. She's warm inside the cluster now, there is no nectar flowing. April showers bring May flowers, these are busy ladies, hoarding nectar pollen to feed their hungry babies. The queen is laying heavy now, she feeds on royal jelly. She fills 2,000 cells per day, the eggs come from her belly. The eggs are laid, the larvae fed, the pupa are transforming. The hive is growing large now, and soon they will be swarming. Worker bees have many jobs, cleaning, feeding, waxing, dancing, stinging, flying through. We're sure it must be taxing. Well, the bees have reached full numbers now, the warming winds do blow. The summer plants now in full bloom bring on a honey flow. The bees dance in a figure eight, to us it sure is funny. They tell the source of nectar sweet to make some yummy honey. Well, the air is cool, the trees are bare, the summer work so good. Homes are full of honey now, there will be no more clover. Mr. Drone, your job's complete, our age is neighbor. The frost has come, the blues are gone, the days are still We got another one here. One of our favorite Bill Gaines tunes. There we go.
T.
G. All God's critters got a place in the choir. Some sing low, some sing higher, some sing out loud. Some telephone wire, some just clap their hands or paws or anything they got now.
Is that an
Listen to the bass, it's the one on the bottom where the bullfrog groans and the hippopotamus moans and groans with a big to-do. The old cow just goes moo. All God's critters got a place in the choir. Some sing low, some sing high, some sing out loud on the telephone. Some just clap their hands and paws or anything they got.
Well, the dogs and the cats, they take up the middle where the hummingbird hums and the cricket fiddles. Donkey brays and the pony neighs. Old coyote howls.
Well, listen to the top where the little birds sing on the melody with the high note ringing. Hoot owl hollers over everything. The jaybird disagrees. All God's critters got a place in the choir. Some sing low, some sing higher, some sing out loud on the telephone wire. Some just clap their hind paws for everything they got now. Singing in the nighttime, singing in the day. The little duck quacks and is on his way. The possum ain't got much to say, and the porcupine talks to himself.
It's a simple song, living song everywhere. By the ox and the fox, the grizzly bear, the grumpy alligator and the hawk above, the sly raccoon and the turtle dove. All God's critters got a place in the choir. Some sing low, some sing high, some sing out loud on the telephone wire. Some just clap their hands, paws, or anything they got. Well, all God's critters got a place in the choir. Some sing low, some sing high, some sing out loud on the telephone wire. Some just clap their hands, paws, or anything they got now. That's it, Bob.
1 minute.
I got one more thing for 1 minute. Henry Beston, wonderful philosophic, naturalistic philosopher. He says we need another and a wiser and perhaps a more mystical concept of animals, remote from universal nature and living by complicated artifice. Man in civilization surveys the creature through the glass of his knowledge and sees thereby a feather magnified and the whole image in distortion. We patronize them, these creatures, for their incompleteness, for their tragic fate of having taken form so far below ourselves. And therein we err and greatly err, for the animal shall not be measured by man. In a world older and more complete than ours, they move finished and complete, gifted with extensions of the senses we have lost or never attained, living by voices we shall never hear. They are not brethren, they are not underlings, they are other nations, caught with ourselves in the net of life and time, fellow prisoners of the splendor and travail of the earth.
Episode 2 of BTV with your host, Robert John Bernard. Next up, we have a mutual aid panel discussion, so stick around. Thanks to everyone who helped make this happen, all our sponsors and the co-presenters, Crosshatch, Vesty, Earthwork, and every Saturday at 10 a.m. we'll be out here in the B yard for BTV.
Be there or be square.